Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr Speaker, it may surprise the member who's just resumed his seat to know that when all of the rhetoric is stripped away, there would be substantial agreement with the core proposition that he presented. I certainly agree that New Zealand doesn't export enough, that we do not innovate enough, and that we don't save enough. It's easy to say those things. The challenge becomes implementing the policies that will achieve change in those areas. And that's where I start to part company with the member who's just resumed his seat. So I'm probably in the unique position of being able to give a somewhat dispassionate analysis of what happened since 2008. And I say to the previous government this: at the time the 2008 budget was prepared, the depth of the international global recession was not readily imaginable. Members will recall that fateful week in October 2008, in the midst of our election campaign, which began one weekend with the Irish government announcing that because of the depth of the international recession, it was going to immediately guarantee all bank deposits. Around the world, people thought that was a very far-fetched decision. By the end of the week, every government, including ours, was doing the same in respect of their own nations. The point of that, Mr Speaker, is to underline the speed, the depth and the lack of clear vision leading up to this crisis. So when the government changed here in November, a few short weeks after that calamitous week, it clearly needed to take stock and to make a series of changes to the existing settings to get New Zealanders through. The member made a telling point that I want to come back to. The member made a telling point that I want to come back to. He talked about unemployment. And the experience of New Zealand in previous recessions under both governments had been that the first casualty was employment. People went to the scrap heap. The fact this year, in this recession, that contrary to predictions of a much higher level of unemployment, New Zealand's topped out at around 7% is a deliberate tribute to the policies that were put in place after 2008 to cushion that impact, to keep people in jobs and to make sure that we did not suffer the level of unemployment that had bedevilled us in the past, Mr Speaker. When the budget was brought down in 2009, it was against the backdrop of a rapidly deteriorating revenue base. We'd gone through a decade of budget surpluses. We were now into a period of prolonged deficit. We wanted to preserve that social core that I've just spoken of and to position this economy for the transition through the recession last year to recovery this year and beyond. And, Mr Speaker, the measures contained in that budget, which led to the initiatives that were able to be taken this year, have positioned New Zealand very strongly for the future. In addition to those problems that the opposition finance spokesman postulated at the beginning of his speech, there are three other issues that consistently affect the New Zealand economy. We have a highly skilled but highly mobile labour force. Outside Ireland and Luxembourg, we have the highest rate of any OECD country of our labour force living overseas, and we don't have the luxury of spreading them round our European Union neighbours. We have significant levels of debt, $170 billion on current estimate. It does not matter, actually, whether it is public or private debt. It is all debt that is accumulated in the ledger entry against New Zealand, and we face chronic fiscal problems in terms of balancing our budget. So, Mr Speaker, the challenge that the government faced and why it embarked upon what was to become a major program of tax reform, a tax switch if you like, was to rebalance the economy in such a way to give us a fighting chance of improving our productivity and savings record, of boosting our export growth and of creating a positive future for New Zealanders so that they would feel inclined to stay here and build this economy rather than go and assist someone else build theirs. Mr Speaker, what has happened since the budget? The profound changes to personal taxes, the restructuring of the property investment regime, the move in the GST with the full compensation to affected parties, has been a generally positive reaction around New Zealand because New Zealanders have seen this has been a step in the right direction. And when you look at the structure of marginal tax rates and see that now, from the 1st of October, the top marginal rate payable by nearly three-quarters of New Zealand taxpayers will be just 17.5 cents in the dollar. That is a profound shift from what it was 2 years ago. In fact, it's almost half what the rate of tax at that level of income would have been paying 2 years ago. That's a huge improvement. When you note that the biggest proportionate changes in tax rates have been at the bottom end of the scale, so that people on low incomes now get a much better boost from the tax system than they did previously, that has got to be good news. When you see that we've stopped the rort because of high-income earners being able to channel their incomes through trusts to minimise their tax liability, we've stopped that by aligning those rates. That will mean that there are more opportunities for that additional capital to be invested in savings and further investment to boost the growth of the New Zealand economy. When we've tackled the imbalances in the property market through the removal of depreciation, but we haven't so distorted the market through other more punitive measures, again, Mr Speaker, that is about giving New Zealanders an opportunity to make their investment decisions based on the quality of the investment concerned, not the tax advantages to derive from it. Mr Speaker, it is little wonder that around this country at the moment, people are saying this is a step forward, this is a balanced budget tax package, this is one that gives us some hope. Now, I note, sir, that that's causing the opposition parties some particular difficulty. I note that Mr Cunliffe was in Palmerston North recently and basically said that the budget had some good elements, that a reversal of the government's GST hike is unlikely if Labor takes charge after the next election, but exempting fresh fruit and vegetables is a serious option. He also went on to say that he was not opposed to the reduction in the company tax rate, but he signalled, and here's the crunch, the overblown property sector would come under further scrutiny if Labor returned to power next year. So, Mr Speaker, a capital gains tax is back on the opposition's agenda. Let them deny that. That's always been something they've hankered after. It's signalled very clearly there. And when you add to that other statements that the way to align tax rates is to keep the top tax rate at 38% and boost the trust rate to 38%, then you're drawn to this conclusion. Change the government and New Zealanders will pay more tax through their income. They'll pay more tax when it comes to a capital gains tax on virtually everything other than the family home that moves. Highly complicated, highly inefficient, but that's what they're hankering after. And those fundamental challenges, Mr Speaker, that the New Zealand economy faces will not be dealt with. A lot of people say we've got to stop the bleeding of our population, of young people in particular, to Australia and elsewhere. Fair enough. One of the drivers, by no means the only driver, but one of the drivers of that is what people perceive to be a fairer and more equitable tax regime elsewhere. What we're going to see if the changes being proposed opposite come to effect is that trickle at the moment become an absolute flood, because there'll be no incentive for young people to stay and make a future here. There certainly won't be an incentive for them to return home. So, Mr Speaker, what we face with this budget and the progress from it and the steps that will follow is a generational change in the psyche of New Zealanders when it comes to thinking about their future. What this government is about is trying to say to people, we want to give you a chance for a positive future. We want to give you some encouragement for what you do, to do better. And what we see from the opposition now is grudging acceptance of that, but a return to the old envy politics, where higher taxes for higher tax earners, and we've seen the distortion that that's caused over the years. Labor putting the top tax rate up 10 years ago was the biggest single tax policy blunder in this country's history in that time. It's led to massive avoidance and evasion problems, which we're now getting on top of. They want to return to that and saddle the New Zealand population with a capital gains tax as well. Mr Speaker, the country will face a stark choice next year, not just in political terms, but in terms of its own future. And I'm very confident that young New Zealanders, weighing up their options, will not want to rejoin that race to the past that's being painted by members opposite. I come back, as I conclude, to Mr Cunliffe's scenario. New Zealanders do need to invest more. We do need to export more. We do need to save more. But we need liberating policies that will achieve that, not stifling bureaucracy and controls which will prevent people realising their potential. That's the challenge that faces this country. What this budget, what this financial program is about, is giving New Zealanders that positive opportunity.
I call the Honourable Trevor Mallard.